All right, everyone, thanks for coming. We have an exciting day here. This is, I guess, the first and maybe last ever, but PFAA little podcast here. We're talking about heat preparation. I'm Brent Fikowski, the president of the PFAA. We've got Gommaar D'Hust from WAD Science doing a lot of incredible stuff with science-based training and research in the CrossFit space. And graciously, we have Chloe Farnham and Jeremy Reardon. I don't want to butcher all of the wonderful things they've done, but specifically to this conversation, they've been helping the PFAA with some research and creating a document to help fitness athletes, CrossFit athletes, functional fitness athletes prepare for competitions in the heat and heat preparation. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to quickly start by, why don't we just kind of go one by one, tell us a little bit about your experience. Chloe, if you're open to starting first, where are you based, and what's your experience like when it comes to heat preparation for athletes?
So I'm a fourth-year medical student. I'm currently in Salt Lake City. I'm in a weird part of medical school where you kind of move around and get to experience different programs before applying to residency. So I'm planning to apply into orthopedics. My background kind of comes from being an athlete myself. Jeremy and I both did the Masters CrossFit Games this past year. And so we just kind of wanted to bring our knowledge with being able to digest more of the medical literature to give athletes a better idea of what that says and maybe provide any help that we could.
Great. Thank you. Jeremy?
Yeah, so Jeremy, and I am a rising third-year chief resident for family medicine residency with a plan to go into sports medicine fellowship after this year. And I currently serve on a couple different committees and try to do as much sports coverage as possible while also taking part in as many sports as possible. And so, just like Chloe was saying, we were working at the Masters CrossFit Games in 2024 with Joshua Hicks, and we were just talking about how we could get more involved and try to take some of the education that we've gained along our path in medicine and try to apply that and help the athletes out as best as we can and kind of focus on prevention and safety.
Amazing. Yeah, and Gommaar, obviously you've done all sorts of stuff in the last few years to progress sort of, science-based training and really dive into the anatomy and the physiology of athletes in this sport. Have you done anything specifically regarding like heat preparation or how heat affects training yet in functional fitness?
Yeah, in functional fitness, not really. So I'm an exercise physiologist by training. I have done my PhD in an exercise physiology lab back in Belgium. Now I'm situated in Zurich, Switzerland. And one of the things what maybe is interesting is we did a lot of practicals because we had a room in Belgium. Obviously, it's very flat land and there's no altitude or no real heat. So we had a room that you could change the altitude as well as the heat from. And then we did a lot of experiments also with students, with athletes to actually do heat acclimation as well as understanding how much salt you sweat as an athlete, because that's very important. We could analyze that in the lab. So I might have some interesting insights there. Related to it. This is mostly cycling, but I think it's very much the same for functional fitness and everything high intensity, I would say.
Yeah, that's exciting. I know I've met some people where I'm from. I mean, so, for those of you that don't know, I competed in the sport for about a decade, and I had to do some heat preparation myself over the years, bit of trial and error, and then again, trying to digest some of this literature or speak with people that, we're helping maybe some Olympians in rowing, one specifically in rowing, prep for heat, and then trying to figure that out so that I was still doing the training I knew I needed to do to just prepare, physically to be fit and strong and everything. But then on top of that, trying to add in, okay, how do I make sure I'm ready for the heat? Where I live can get pretty warm here. It's dry. It's not a humid heat, but knowing I was going to a competition that may or may not be outdoors, probably hotter, probably, higher UV index, definitely more humidity. So trying to figure that out. And I thought that with the PFAA, we want athletes to have a strong voice to shape the future of their careers, to shape the future of the sport. That's at the core of what we're doing. And one of those initiatives, as well as alongside that, is to just provide more direct services to athletes to help them through their careers, through their journey. Some of those are financial, some of those are with training, with safety specifically. So when it comes to heat training, let's kind of just start from the very beginning. I mean, we have a document on this. Everyone can read through that, and we're going to kind of go through some of that, get deeper in details with some of that. Maybe Chloe, let's start with you, if you're all right with that. Tell us just generally, when it comes to an athlete in the heat, what's happening that's different than an athlete, whether it's training or competition, really, in a, let's call it an air-conditioned gym, relative to doing that same kind of exercise in the heat? What's different?
So a lot of the articles that we referenced in our document kind of talk about thermal strain. And so when you're exercising in a hot environment, whether it be the sun or just a hot gym, maybe your air conditioning isn't quite on full blast. Ultimately, the goal of heat training is to reduce that thermal strain. And thermal strain kind of works in a couple of different ways, but when you the thermal strain first increases your heart rate. And the reason that your heart rate increases is so that your blood can provide oxygen to your muscles as they're working really hard, whatever workout that you're doing. And so thermal strain causes the increased heart rate, but when you do the heat training, it essentially can lower your core body temperature when you're at these maximal work rates, and also can help you keep your heart rate lower. So we kind of went into a couple different avenues for that, but hydration also plays a big role, and your ability to sweat. So the reason that your body produces sweat is so that you can kind of dissipate that heat into the environment as your muscles are working hard. They produce heat. And so you want to be able to dissipate that heat. And one of the big ways that your body does that is through sweating. And so when you heat train, your body essentially gets better at sweating. Whether it be through increased blood flow to the skin can also help dissipate that heat. And Gommaar's probably more of an expert in this because he actually studies it, but that was kind of what we wanted to hit on, is that it reduces that thermal strain through increased cardiovascular efficiency and kind of causing those adaptations.
Yeah, one of the first things that happens is there's this, on a relative base, there's more blood flow that goes through the skin to dissipate the heat. So to provide the same amount of oxygen, as Chloe said, to the working muscles, you actually obviously have to have more, like a higher heart rate for the same work output. And that's obviously limited, because when you are doing a workout, like for example, Fran, or something very like high intensity, close to your VO2 max, there's only a certain amount of oxygen that can be provided to all the muscles. And when there's a larger percentage that goes to the skin to dissipate heat, you obviously have to decrease your work capacity to be able to just do the work, right? So that's basically very simply what happens if a non-heat acclimated person just goes into the Texas heat or whatever heat and just does the same workout, I would say.
Yeah. And let's dive in a little bit to, and you mentioned it a bit, Chloe, about actual heat preparation. So we know, okay, you're doing exercise in the heat, it's harder than doing it in the air conditioning. I think everyone knows that. You're probably not going to be able to go as fast as if you're in this perfectly air conditioned, fanned room. So in order to, you're never going to, no matter how much heat training you do, you're not going to have the same level of, performance in a hotter climate than you would if it was, perfectly cooled and chilled. But there are still things you can do in your training leading up to that to maximize your performance. That's going to change. So I know, like, I went to a competition and the doctor at the beginning will say, give some heat stuff, and they'll say 2 weeks. It takes 2 weeks to heat prep, and it's like, well, we're already here, so that 2 weeks hopefully had been done, which is why, of course, we're having this conversation. So hopefully, some athletes, if they have a competition in the heat in the coming months and years, they can do that heat prep. So let's kind of get into that. You hear that 2 weeks often. Anyone can jump in here. I mean, maybe Jeremy's up next, but let's talk a bit about why 2 weeks. What happens in 2 weeks of heat training? What are we looking for from a generally speaking? What does the research say about those 2 weeks and how what you should be doing there? And then what sort of adaptations are provided in that 2 weeks of heat preparation?
Sure. So a lot of this it's all about preparation, right? So you want to understand in what environment you're going to be competing in. And we've provided links within the document for websites where you can go and get a really good breakdown of what the weather is going to be like where you are competing. And so that's probably the first step. You want to see, is it even, there can be warm and rainy days, there can be warm and sunny days, and your body's going to react differently in each environment. So that can happen months in advance. It's, as in the fitness world right now, we're starting to see things kind of last all year long. And so you may have a competition in February that you're getting ready for. So it can be kind of difficult to think about one that's later in June. But if you can start a few months ahead of time and then sort of have a refresher of those 2 weeks later on, knowing what it will take to get you to that point where you feel good, it's great to start earlier. So, but to answer your question kind of about the first 2 weeks. So within the first week, you're going to start seeing things and noticing in your workouts where your heart rate's not going as high and your body temperature is staying low, and you're noticing from day to day that you're having an increase in work capacity. And then from there, you're going to see aerobic capacity in that second week and an increase in plasma flow and sort of kind of the blood flow we were talking about earlier, getting to your skin, that kind of takes place in that second week. So yeah.
Yeah, like your plasma volume will increase, so you basically will have more blood, which is predominantly plasma, no red blood cells, unfortunately. But that's one of the first and major adaptation I would say is that you just retain more fluid, so you can pump around more blood, per given time frame. That helps for sweating, but also helps for actually providing oxygen towards the working muscles.
And in that 2 week heat prep, I'll have athletes ask me about a heat prep, and they'll say, yeah, maybe I'll try and jump in the sauna a few more times before I go compete. And although it's going to help, I think the priority, right, is to actually be exercising in heat, exercising at an elevated core temperature. What would be the difference? Why would just jumping in a sauna in the evening or in the morning maybe not have the same type of effect?
Yeah, just from the top of my head, I would say it's also just the duration. You cannot stay for that long in a sauna, right? So what you could do, for example, is top it up, like you do a sauna after your heat training, to maybe not exert yourself too much when you're doing already a 90-minute session in the heat. You don't want to do even more, right? That's one. So yeah, I would say the core temperature. To increase the core temperature and to get the adaptations from the heat, you need also some heat dissipation from the working muscle, from the actual energy expenditure. So again, I think you just need a sustained high core temperature for the long-term adaptations to occur, and just only doing sauna is just too short, I would say, and can be used as an add-on, but not necessarily as a only thing to do. To acclimate to the heat when you're doing exercise training, obviously.
Right, and in the sauna itself is sort of the stimulus, right? Anybody goes into a sauna, you're going to have an increase in your heart rate, you're going to be sweating, and so that is the thing that's getting you to that point. But if you think about exercising, the sauna being the setting instead of the stimulus, the workout should be the stimulus. That should be the thing that you're trying to adapt. Over time, you will be able to spend more time in a sauna and get more used to that sort of heat. But really what we're going for is the actual workout and the performance of your workout increasing. And so it's the setting in which you do it.
Before you mentioned, so, we talked about this sort of, 2 weeks of heat prep. You want to do that right before the competition, essentially. So you're, at the end of that 2 weeks, you're ready for the heat and you're kind of jumping into your competition shortly after that. But you did mention hopefully doing it beforehand and then a refresher. Is there a physiological change that happens and there's a bit of kind of maintenance and you top it up? Or is it more the, like the familiarity with it, and you go, okay, now I know what that feels like. I can kind of prep for that. I know that after 2 weeks, I did feel a difference. I know for me, like when I've done a heat prep, definitely that first week is really hard. Like it's just, my times are suffering. I'm not running as fast. I'm not performing as well. Sometimes I'll wake up after a big sleep and I'm like, I'm not recovered. But then by the end of that 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, I'm not that I'm thriving in the heat, but I'm getting through. I'm able to like modulate. I don't feel like the heat is just completely controlling me. So that doing a heat prep, having some time off, doing another heat prep, is that first 2 weeks, is that a physiological thing? Or is that a more kind of like a logistic preparation? I can let Chloe answer this one.
So yeah. So we kind of cover it in the article a little bit, but essentially you can induce those physiologic changes, and then it will decline. The 2014 paper from Doha said you can expect those adaptations to last between 2 and 4 weeks, with an estimated decline of like 2.5% per day if you don't do repeated heat exposure. So that could be something like sitting in the sauna, the post-training sauna bathing could help slow that decline. But the reason that we would say, or the research says that you should do the initial preseason type heat training session and then do a refresher course is because you'll be able to induce those adaptations to come back faster the second time. So you might be able to keep your intensity higher going straight from there to the competition, which could be advantageous. But that's why they recommend the kind of preseason and then the refresher course.
And I think, Brent, CrossFit obviously has never been, or high intensity functional movements haven't been specifically, let's say, looked at in those studies. It's usually running or something monostructural. But I mean, just practically, if you think about it as a CrossFit athlete or a high intensity athlete, what you could do, for example, to be able to still adapt to the heat, but not suffering on your intensity, because I think that's a very integral part of your training, certainly for CrossFit athletes. And I think you're also referring to that was a bit annoying for you, is maybe you do your high intensity sessions or your strength sessions potentially in the normal temperature, in the cold, so to speak, but then maybe you do some zone 2 training, like 1.5 hour, 2 hours bike sessions, low impact sessions, really in the scorching heat. That could kind of have best of both worlds, I would say, and you're likely are not going to suffer too much on the recovery side of things because of the relatively low intensity work. So that's something that can be considered. I don't think it has been specifically looked at in research, but practically, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm gonna, and by the end of the video here, we're gonna dive into a little bit of, in combination with everything that was written with the help of Chloe and Jeremy. I added in a little bit of a 2-week refresher, which of course everyone, I'd love you to go and read that. We can talk about that in a bit. I want to talk briefly about, and I've had this from my personal experience. Again, you're in a perfect world, you're able to, move or fly to the place you're going to be competing in, and assuming that the weather is going to remain unchanged for 3 weeks prior, you're just immersing yourself directly in the specific area. You're like, well, this is what the sun's going to feel like. This is what the heat's going to feel like. This is probably the humidity. Now, not everyone's able to do that financially. So you're making do with what you have. Now, maybe if you're Gommaar, you have this fancy state-of-the-art laboratory where they can control the humidity and the temperature. Maybe even there's a fan in there to control the specific miles per hour of the wind. But if you're not like that, something mentioned in the article is a sauna suit. I'd be curious if any of you have any personal experience using a sauna suit or helping athletes use something like that, and what you found when compared to, really being in the environment itself.
Yeah,
I do not have any personal experience with sauna suits.
So what we did, no, not really, but what we did with our students and athletes is to have even like a more extreme effect of the heat. We put on heaters and just clothes during the bike, right? So what we actually did is we did exercise test to exhaustion on normal temperature, like 12 degrees, pretty cold, and then at the very hot temperatures, 30 degrees, 32 degrees, and higher humidity, and then also at altitude at 4,000 meter. And then we want to see how much their VO2 max was decreasing. And you see almost the same decrease in a non-heat acclimated person from the heat compared to 4,000 meters of altitude, right? So that's maybe interesting to know. So it's completely logical that you feel very bad in the beginning. Just thinking out loud related to the sauna suit is the respirate, like the evaporation, the sweating. I'm not sure you can completely compare exactly the same, because obviously when you have if just your bare skin, the water can evaporate, and I think it would even improve the sweating or the dissipation from sweat. And with such a sauna suit, that I think is going to be decreased a bit. So maybe it's even a stronger effect on heat acclimation, and maybe you feel even more, I don't know, overwhelmed by the heat. I don't know exactly. Maybe people from the audience can give us some hints there, but it certainly will work, I think.
Yeah, I can speak from experience. It definitely gets hot. I've worn, rain jacket, or I've never, I haven't actually had a sauna suit. I've tried a rain jacket. I've put a black trash bag on, and yeah, you sweat and it just stays there. You take off the black garbage bag and it's just pouring out, like 3 cups of water. So yeah, it definitely sticks, and you're not getting that benefit of the evaporation off your skin, which should cool you. So yeah, I don't really have an apples to apples, because I've never went to an event and done a heat prep there, but I can say that this, putting on a trash bag or a sauna suit, you get plenty hot. So
have you ever used these core temperature pills, Brent, where so what we had in the lab is you have a pill, you swallow it, and then you can know your actual core temperature, right?
Oh, wow.
Because it's not you can measure skin temperature, but it's not your core temperature, right? So that's what we had, and there we saw, for example, if you do a VO2 max test at 32 degrees Celsius, I mean, even students who are not even that fit, they went up to 39 degrees, crazy high. So so I don't know if you use that, because that could be also a useful metric for you to know if you're actually increasing your core temperature, obviously.
No, I haven't used that. I know that sometimes they'll use the invasive, I think, rectal thermometer is the term. I haven't used one of those. I did have a Core. There's a brand, it's called Core, and you put it on your chest and it claims to, track.
Yeah, it will be pretty close. And did it go up a lot? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I found with that, it was very delayed. So it was, whether or not that's actually what was happening, so I would do a really hot workout, and maybe if it was 30 minutes, and it would increase over the course of the workout. I'd look at the end of the workout, I'm exhausted, I'm hot, and it would, I have to look back at my data, but it would have a number. But then 20, 30, 40 minutes later, I'm maybe like, I'm maybe keeping the stuff on, I'm cooling down, but I'm done exercising. It would continue to rise for 20 or 30 minutes, and then it would come down. And so it wasn't like it wasn't a live metric that I could use actively to essentially keep myself safe. So if I was training for an hour at intensity, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna maybe stop myself if it gets too hot. Of course, it would be far behind those feelings that I was feeling. And I found that I still used it. And sure enough, in the sessions where I felt, oh, this is like my limit, this is the hottest I've ever been, 20, 30 minutes later, the data would show me, yeah, that was really, really hot, Brent. But it wouldn't show me, at least that specific sensor, it wouldn't show me in real time. So, I was able to use my my intuition, and kind of began to trust it. But I think what's interesting is, typically if someone's doing a heat prep in fitness, they're probably taking it pretty seriously. And if they're taking it pretty seriously, they're probably pretty tough. So, I think having something potentially to stop them and hold them back from getting, an actual serious heat injury in training is probably going to be beneficial for this type of athlete, ideally. Or just knowing like, hey, it's, don't hurt yourself here. Let's not push it too hard on the first few heat prep days, knowing, the steps that you need to have just to stay safe. Let's kind of switch gears here, if that's all right. Let's talk a bit about hydration, drinking, and electrolytes. I'd love to just hear a bit of a preamble from either maybe Jeremy or Chloe on, what are some basic strategies? This can come pretty much straight from the document, but what's the science say about, keeping those the fluid up, as well as the electrolytes? Want to jump in there, Jeremy, for me?
Yeah, sure. So with hydration, there's no perfect way of doing it. It's very person to person based. But at least for the evidence, we can see that if you're drinking water, you're adding 0.5 to 0.7 grams per liter of sodium over 1 hour. That's a good approach. And if you're cramping, you want to increase that to 1.5 grams. But really the goal here, and one of the ideas, is that no matter what situation you're in, having hydration is going to be better than no hydration, right? And so if we're thinking about CrossFit competitions, depending on the workout, that might be a little bit difficult to have during, getting your hydration in during the event. But that's why it's even more important before and after to stay hydrated. And one of the things, there's sort of a misnomer. You can find articles out there talking about hyponatremia, which would be like low salt from overhydrating, but really this takes a lot of work. You really have to work at it to become overhydrated if you're a high level fitness athlete. And so that getting to that point requires drinking like 3 to 4 liters of fluid. Something that's not really practical during an exercise or even afterwards. Really, your body has defense mechanisms to try and keep you from getting to that point. By drinking that much, you're going to start feeling nauseated and that sort of thing. And so to that point, also, you really want to always have hydration, because there's different types of hyponatremia. They're not all created equal. And for example, if a patient comes into a hospital, say they just come from an event of some sort and they're hyponatremic, we look at them, but we also will look at their body volume and see if they're what's called hypovolemic, meaning they've lost some kind of fluids, which is what the athlete would be experiencing, or euvolemic, which is they seem to be completely fine with their hydration level. Or hypervolemic. And then from there, there's a whole algorithm that you follow with hyponatremia. So it really is a fluid situation. Having too much fluid in you is going to reduce the salt in your body. But the thing to remember is that you're losing these electrolytes actively, and much more than you would think. And so just kind of following the evidence, it's that 0.5 grams per liter that you really want to aim for to maintain throughout the workout.
Yeah, from there it might be interesting. I mean, if you really obviously a high level athlete and you do a lot of competitions in the heat, to have your minerals, your salt check that is in your sweat. I mean, that's also something that we did, at least in our lab, and I'm sure that there's a lot of labs in the world who do this, because there's a lot of a lot of variability between people how much salt they actually sweat. Like I have seen values from 0.5 grams per liter of sweat to 5 grams, right? So obviously the 0.5 to 0.75, what Jeremy says is an average. But if you're a high caliber athlete, I think it might make sense if you're doing a lot of weekend competitions in the heat and you lose a lot of sweat, and even you train a lot, probably, then you can think about, okay, how much do I actually have to replace according to my body, because it's something genetic and we don't really know why some people are losing more salt than others. So yeah, I think it might be something to look for, if there's an institute nearby.
And when we look at like electrolytes are composed of, correct me if I'm wrong here, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, right? Sodium kind of being the big number one. If you're just having table salt sodium, right, or Himalayan pink salt, is that going to be sufficient? Do you really recommend having, some with a bit of the potassium, magnesium, calcium? How important do you guys think that is?
It's all about balance, because you are losing those things in your salt, or in your sweat, excuse me. And each one of those things, like, why is magnesium important? Why is potassium important? Not to get too far into the weeds of I guess the science topic, but you have these different channels that are in your body that whether it's in your muscle or in your brain or your heart, and there's sodium, potassium. So you're giving up a sodium, gaining a potassium. And there's other ones throughout your body where chloride is involved, specifically with your sweating. And so you want to replace those. We didn't really get into magnesium, potassium, and calcium in the paper per se, but you'll see that I think over the years, maybe if you look at a Gatorade, for example, you'll see things like sugar in there, and they may also have some of these other electrolytes. But now, as we've gotten more evidence and more information about it, you'll find that the products the little electrolyte packet products, they've started increasing the amount of these other electrolytes, not just the salt. And so it is good to try and gain the most that you can. But like you said, the meat is really kind of in the sodium.
Yeah, great. Let's jump into cooling strategies. So it's kind of funny. Obviously, this article talks about let's prepare for the heat. And so you're intentionally putting yourself in these like really hot situations, or as hot as you can handle, to create a physiological adaptation. But then also when you get to competition, you're playing this game of like, let's try to keep me as cool as possible before the event, after the event, maybe even during the event. You'll see people wearing, wet t-shirts. You're going to see people now, a lot of runners are going to have these like cooling bands on their foreheads. Some of them are electronic. Some of them are, just like ice packs or kind of artificial things that don't have any electricity. Let's first talk about the heat prep. So in those 2 weeks, a couple months out, and then the 2 weeks before, should you be testing some of these cooling things? Should you be doing it before, after your workout, or should you just be like avoiding cooling, kind of like the plague? You're like, hey, I'm not going to do any cooling. I'm going to it's all heat, it's all heat, it's all heat. And then game day, I'm going to bring in as much cooling as possible. Do you have any opinions on that? Chloe, want to jump in?
Yeah, I can talk about this a little bit. So obviously you have like the competition experience, so on actual game day what the athletes are going to want. But ideally for the heat prep, you kind of get the level of adaptations that you're able to achieve come from the intensity and the duration of your increased core body temperature. So while it would be great to kind of test out which cooling strategy you might be more comfortable with on actual competition day, ideally you would want to let your core body temperature kind of remain elevated. However, we are talking about ways to measure this, and I think it's important to kind of give a disclaimer that a core body temperature over 104 degrees Fahrenheit is kind of that threshold where after that you should definitely start exploring these cooling strategies. However, in order to induce those adaptations during the heat prep cycle, probably better to let your core body temperature remain elevated. And then in the article, we talked a little bit about different options for cooling strategies. So we mentioned cooling vests, which allow you to bring down your core body temperature without maybe cooling the muscles of your extremities that might have to be warmed back up for the next workout, which might be advantageous. Another option would be ingesting ice. So ice versus cold water. Ice is going to essentially be able to absorb more of that body heat and bring your body temperature more than if you just drank cold water. And then kind of the final option is cold water immersion. So sitting in an ice bath. That's kind of the most evidence-based way of rapidly bringing down a core body temperature. So especially if you see your core temperature going over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, that would probably be a good option. But with that, we kind of realized that you'd have to warm back up because you're cooling your extremities.
Yeah.
It might be related to, for example, the cooling vest. You see this a lot in professional cycling, for example, exactly what Chloe said, that they keep for example, in Tour de France, they keep their core the core temperature at the normal pace or temperature, and then they heat up the legs. And that's something I think you could at least try before a competition, because I've never worn it, but I would suggest that or suspect that this could be kind of a strange feeling, and you don't want to implement any strange feelings before a major competition. So just to test it, maybe you could at least do such a a cooling vest for sure. I would always suggest to try everything out that you are wanting to try in competition before, right? Because otherwise you're gonna have some problems maybe.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think I've been known to say nothing new on race day. So I think there's a sweet spot between, trying out a few of those things to make sure it's not something that's super uncomfortable. I think in the document I've linked some cooling vests. I had a friend who actually helps. He works for SpaceX to help keep the rocket cool. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna buy a cooling vest here. This was last year. I'm like, what do you recommend? And he really recommended one that was that had flowing water through it. If you just buy one that's this is from him. But if you just bought one that was, fabric with ice packs on it, he's like, it would cool you at first, and then those benefits would sort of be gone, and then it would just act as just like an insulation for your body heat pretty quickly. So having one that, in an ideal world, one that either you can continually dip in cold water or add fresh ice to, so you're kind of continually pulling that heat off of yourself, or one that is battery powered that's going to have flowing cold water through it. And I used it in warm-ups, and it was fine. Again, I think when we hear the word, I got to warm up, right? I have to warm up for my event. And that's an expression that's used, and that is true. Part of that is actual warmth, but really it's the preparing the muscles and the the ligaments and so on to perform the task as much as it is to you don't actually need to be like physically hot to the touch to go and do whatever it is, a couple burpees or a run or whatever that is. With the cooling, I think that kind of covers what I wanted to touch on. And part of that, really is, and we have a little list here for those that want to read it, is really planning, right? Like, don't rely on a competition to have all these things for you. If you think they might have ice tubs, great, bring a towel, right? Bring a change of underwear, bring a swimsuit to wear in there, right? If you can, bring a cooling vest, bring a cooler. I was just at a competition, not a CrossFit one, but I brought my cooler and I just filled it with ice, knowing I would, kind of chew on it. I put some in my water, not counting on competitions to have all of those things for you. When you're thinking about cooling off, is there a part of the body that is the priority? Like, is it the head? Is it the hands? Is it the feet? Is it anywhere you can get cold ice or water on you? Is it near the core, right? You're the center of your mass. Does that matter? Is it whatever you can get it? Are you prioritizing a certain body part? I'd be curious to hear if there's any tips there.
So when we talk about core body temperature, that's like mainly the torso. And so with the cold water immersion, that's why you want to submerge yourself kind of to the level of the shoulders. If there's no ice baths or that's not an option for you, another way to kind of bring that down is putting ice packs over your groin, because there's two big arteries that run through there. So it's not like putting your wrist in an ice bath. It's, you want your torso to cool down because that's where your heart is, and you want to get as much blood cool down as possible.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Have you guys seen, I know I've looked at it a bit. This is a little different. It's a bit of a tangent. It has nothing to do with actual heat prep, but have you seen this stuff where you're like holding on to something cool to intentionally kind of speed up recovery in between sets? Gommaar, are you familiar with this? There's like 2 products that are being sold right now with this. No?
Never heard of this. This is an interesting post. I should look at this.
I'll have to send it to you after. There's
that would be nice.
Yeah, it's different than this. It's certainly not about like core temperature, but there's something about the different blood vessels in your hand that so that's kind of why I asked that question, but we'll talk about that another time. So the priority, folks listening at home, core, your center of your mass, and I guess your groin. Gosh, that would be, I mean, that would probably do the trick.
Maybe we should, Brent, we should also mention the cooling, like using the cold water immersion. I mean, I think what Chloe also mentioned is really like in competition cooling. Like the goal of the cold water is to bring down the temperature, because you see a lot of people now also just during training doing a lot of cold bathing, and there is actually some research showing that this reduces the adaptations of the training, right? So that's maybe something to at least make a difference between those two, in competition and let's say in training, cold water immersion.
Yeah, and so right now, obviously, cold plunging and cold water immersions, a bit trendy for maybe the health benefits, or what is it, fat thermogenesis. There's like all these different things, or maybe it's mental alertness in the morning.
Yeah.
We're specifically talking about it lowering the core temperature, so that if you can start an event with a slightly lower core temperature, it's just going to take it longer to get to that 104 Fahrenheit, which is obviously a danger zone. You don't want to get that high, 40 degrees Celsius. So if you can start lower, whereas, I know from experience, if you add a competition, maybe the warm-up area is outside, you're not bringing any, you don't have any ways to strategize cooling. If you've been warming up, you've been out in the heat for 30 minutes, an hour, you're kind of moving around, you get on the starting line, you're thinking, man, I'm hot right now. Like I'm already hot. You're probably already at an elevated core temperature. And if that's a long workout, you're sort of starting, with a whatever half tank of gas, or your engine's already, overheating. And so the hotter you get, like the less output you're going to be able to provide on the floor. And also, from a safety standpoint as well. If you keep pushing yourself mentally to go, you're going to get past that point, and could be in a bad spot.
For sure.
I wonder here, what I have before we end this off is what I sort of wrote and helped write for sort of a training plan, for a bit from my own experience, from what you guys had written as well. Have you guys ever done a heat prep for anyone specifically, went through one yourselves, and you can kind of relate to that experience, even in another sport potentially? If not, I'm happy to just kind of quickly go over some helpful tips.
Yeah, you can go, I think.
Yeah, sure. All right. So really, I think the most important thing, if I'm thinking about a, functional fitness athlete, CrossFit athlete, is, looking at the calendar first, right? So really looking, when is my competition starting? How much time do I have? Can I get there? Yes or no? If we want to have this original 2-week training block, when's that going to fit in my schedule? Then we can have, 4+ weeks, and then another 2-week training block. And ideally, again, those adaptations are happening, it takes 14 days. And so I would always think of it like, okay, I had that 14th day. That's when I'm going to be, fully prepped, but I do need to have a couple days of a taper. So even if I'm losing that 2.5% potentially per day, it's important for me to have that rest, just for my body to recover and have a compensation from the training. So kind of all working that backwards and thinking, okay, 17 days before day one of the competition, that's when my heat prep starts. And then hopefully the 3 days before the actual competition, still it's exposing myself to some heat. So if I'm doing a taper session or a really short session, I'll still try to do it outside. I might go in a sauna briefly. One time I read a book outside wearing a trash bag. Especially if I'm in the new climate at that point, it's humid out there, it's sunny. I'm like, all right, I'm going to just get outside here and, get warm. Now, for those 2 weeks of actual training, probably the biggest thing I can recommend is, trying to plan out your training, pretending there is no heat prep. You should be able to do that training as written, if you and your coach believe that's what's necessary. And then finding ways on every day to do some of that training in the heat. So as you go along, the duration and the intensity in the heat increases. That's basically the two things I think Chloe mentioned earlier. You want to make sure that on the first day, you're not doing all of your events or all of your training for that day in the heat. And especially if some of that training is, a high intensity for a long duration, right? If you're doing a 5K time trial, it's going to be that 20 minutes plus 40 minutes at a high intensity that's going to give you the most kind of risk for heat injury. So, picking that first day, finding whether it's a workout or something monostructural, doing that in the heat, knowing, and I think I wrote this in there as well, like, telling your ego that you are going to go slower, right? The heat is going to force you to go a little slower. You're going to bike slower. You might have to take big breaks with your hands on your knees in between sets of pull-ups. You're not getting less fit. And I think that's something important. Even Gommaar, I'm sure you put athletes through like altitude training, and the output on the bike is less.
Yeah, way less. Yes,
way less.
It's a massive difference.
Yeah.
The good part is that you can kind of modulate this with the intention of the training, right? Exactly what you said. So if you are okay, if you're an athlete who only does high intensity, then it's going to be difficult. But if you are getting into more like lower intensity training, higher duration, this can be pretty easily done in the heat. And even when you have to push whatever 140 watts, and it feels like RPE 4 out of 10, that's good. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're still getting the adaptation in the heat, and it will feel very hard in the beginning for sure.
Yeah, and when I was working with someone here, they'd done some heat prep, and they had someone sitting on like a recumbent bicycle, fit individual, and they had a bunch of space heaters on them, and I think they're wearing a jacket, and they just biked at like zone 1 for an hour, and by the end of it, their internal temperature was like almost at 104 Fahrenheit. Right? So just sitting there, just very casually exercising, and so that training there would have given him, an adequate, day of heat preparation. So just kind of reminding those people out there, if you are listening to this, you do need to do heat preparation. Right. It's about intensity, it's about duration, and both of those just kind of slowly ramping up, using your intuition, but also hopefully doing it incrementally. So by those last few days of the heat prep, you've got a couple, maybe longer or definitely very intense training pieces with the heat, whether that's sauna suit, maybe artificially with some space heaters and humidifiers, or you're just outdoors in the sun, doing your training. And hopefully by those last few days, you can notice a difference than the first few days. You go, oh yeah, like this is still hot, but I'm able to I'm in control, as opposed to just, those first few days, no matter what you do, are probably going to be a little bit painful, and you're going to feel out of your element, but that's all part of it. And you'd rather have it that way than, stepping into that first day of competition and feeling that way. So yeah, well, thanks everyone so much for your time. I think that this should about cover it. I don't want to drag this on. I could talk about this stuff all day, but thank you everyone, Gommaar, Chloe, Jeremy, for your time. And thank you for helping on the document. If you've listened to this, please still go ahead and look at the document for you or the athletes you're working with.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you everyone. Chloe.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.